So this is really just a conversation about the possibility that the experience of I am is an illusion, and that there is actually no self, not existing as a pure awareness even, or a pure consciousness, that the whole apparent experience that I am someone, I am something, experiencing this or life with free will, making choices and decisions as an autonomous entity is an illusion. That whole thing isn't real. But from within that experience, we talk about it as an illusion, because from within the illusion, for the individual, what seems to be happening is real. What it feels or seems to be feels real to the individual, to that experience. So we could say that the illusion only appears for the illusion. So in that sense, it's kind of a reflection of a reflection, because it turns out, or it can turn out in some cases, or it can be seen, not by someone or by something, that that whole thing was never real. It was never really happening. But from within the illusion, why we talk about it and why we can refer to it as being an illusion or as being illusory is because for the person, it feels real. So that's not being denied. The individual isn't being denied in the sense that for the individual, being an individual feels like a real experience. And so that's not being denied. There's no denial that there isn't seeking, because apparently seeking is a response to this sense that I am someone or something who is real, and I am having this experience of life or of everything else. So there's no denial of that either, because because what also seems to appear with this illusion that there is a someone or a something who is existing as an individual or as a self, is that that this self is sort of has a position or a location, which is here. And then as soon as that kind of sense of something existing here, a someone, then that immediately seems to create the impression or the effect that there is here and then everything else. So it sets up this impression of there being two things: me, the I am, the self, and everything else. And for some individuals, not for everyone, but for some individuals, that feels dissatisfying. There's something that just sort of the individual feels that there's something somehow lost or missing about life or the appearance or aliveness or what is, and that this needs something in order to become something better, something more fulfilled, something that feels kind of whole and complete. Because the seeker imagines, obviously, that if it can find what it feels is missing about this or about itself, it will then have an experience of everything being whole and complete and fulfilled. So the seeker is looking to become a fulfilled person. So the seeking is what apparently happens as a response to the illusion, because the illusion from within the illusion seems to be real. And really all the communication is doing is just pointing out that that experience isn't real. It isn't really happening. And that can be seen. That can be seen. And that whole experience really, or that whole setup, that whole sort of sense to be something or someone existing as a separate entity or as this awareness or consciousness can just seemingly melt away. But there's nothing resolved in that. The end of the seeking isn't a conclusion to seeking. The end of seeking can't come about as a result of the effort to seek or to find, because the whole time the seeker is seeking, this is already the wholeness that it's longing for. It's not what the seeker's looking for. The seeker is reading books. If you're anything like me as a seeker, is reading books about this amazing kind of orgasmic spiritual existence as a someone being one with everything and not having any problems or not having any thoughts, and just sort of moving through apparent life as this sort of enlightened being. And of course the seeker is looking for an experience of that nature, of something like that, so that it can become and know what it feels is missing and what it longs for. And we're simply just talking about the possibility that that whole thing is an illusion, or is illusory, that there's nothing lost or missing about this or the appearance, that this is already whole and complete, just as it naturally is. And that includes everything that apparently happens. There's nothing that's not that is wholeness, and there's nothing that's not wholeness. So anything that appears to be happening or arising, that is the wholeness that's longed for. So it's the good, the bad, the ugly, or the apparent good, the bad, the ugly. It's all of it. It's whatever is arising or apparently happening is the wholeness that's longed for already. Okay. And a question in the chat: are you familiar with the double slit experiment, where when observing them waves behaves like particles, thus are changed by observation? Scientists cannot reveal what is reality because of the quality of observation. I've heard about it. Yeah. What's it called? Quantum entanglement, or something like that, isn't it? That a particle here, if it's affected, it can seemingly affect another particle in another place or another space. And that through observation, that I've heard about it. I know nothing about it, but yeah, I've heard about that kind of thing. Yeah, and that the observation can affect the outcome of an experiment of some kind. Yeah, I've heard about that, but I can't say that I know anything about it. And another question in chat: is it just thoughts and or the mind that makes it seem like we are separate individuals? No, it has absolutely nothing to do with thoughts or the mind or thinking. So separation isn't a thought. It's not separate. The apparent separation isn't created by a thought about separation, or the thinking that this is separation, and it's not created by the mind as such. I mean, if you're talking, I mean, really, there is just thinking and thoughts, or the sort of apparent stream of thinking and thoughts, if you want to call that a mind, so be it. But no, it's not being created. It's not separation isn't being created in the mental sense in that way. For the individual, only for the individual, separation, or being a separate someone, seems to be a actual reality. It seems to be a lived experience, which is why I called it an experience in the beginning, not simply just an impression or an idea or a belief. So in the end, it isn't about a kind of a falling away of a belief in separation. Of course, the individual believes that it is real, but that's because the beliefs are really just a confirmation of the experience, because for the individual, it feels itself to be real. So it's a lot deeper than just a kind of a superfluous thought or belief system. which is why the mind struggles with this communication, because it can't find its way out of that. You can't kind of think your way out of separation, because it seems to be only for the individual, this kind of lived experience or this kind of lived reality. I thought it is implying that things and selves are illusion. The only illusion is the self. The only illusion is I am. Everything else is just an appearance. It turns out, of course, that the I am is just an appearance too, but we call it an illusion because it isn't real. It isn't actually a real happening. It turns out not to have any existence at all in the end. And there is just no someone to be separate or to be having an experience of what apparently happens. What appears within the illusion, for the illusion, of course, is that there are separate things. But the separation isn't necessarily the good, the bad, the hot and the cold, the on and the off, etc. It is, the separation is the apparent individual. It's really the apparent separation begins as the individual arises, because for the individual, there's a sense of something here. And what that seemingly does is automatically create the impression that there is also something here. There's me, and then something else, and that's the apparent separation. And the seeker is looking for a way to sort of overcome this feeling of separateness. It's looking for something that is going to give it a sense of unicity. But the seeker will never find it because it isn't lost. The seeker will never find wholeness or oneness because the seeker is never separate from wholeness or oneness. So even if wholeness or oneness is appearing as a separate self who feels themselves to be living in this dualistic world where there is something lost or missing, even if wholeness is appearing as that, it's still wholeness. It's still home, just appearing as something that experiences itself to be not home.
Hey Neil.
Hello.
Hey.
Oh,
So
hello.
I was 4 days apparently with Tony, and
Oh,
so there
right.
was at one point really that this is it,
Mm,
and I feel as if now everything is resisting this. It's like it feels as if such a when I was just now listening to you, I felt like hitting you.
yeah.
It felt like such an
Mm,
immense. I
mm,
don't want what the shit are you saying? Like this kind of
mm,
energy was extremely coming up,
mm.
and yeah,
Yeah,
like yes, yeah,
yeah, that's what's happening. I'll tell you a funny story though. There's just simply nothing to be done about that, Laura. You know, that's just what's
yeah,
happening. Before I died, I'd been on a residential. It was with Jim Newman though, actually, and it was the first time I'd ever been to a non-duality event of any kind, and it turned out to be the last time as well. But a funny story, yeah, I remember calling Tony. I mean, everything had just, there had been an apparent falling away, and everything was just kind of just open spaciousness. It was pretty wild, but there was still something here, kind of having an experience with that. So I hadn't quite died. And I remember Tony, and without going into details of conversation because it's not important, I remember hanging up the phone. I'd never spoken to him before, but I remember hanging up the phone and just thinking, fuck this, fuck you, fuck Tony Parsons, fuck non-duality. I'm done with all of it. And I didn't listen to anything for a couple of days, and then I woke up one morning and just it just all went. So
mm.
there's just no, there's no rhyme or reason to it. Yeah. Yeah, one can apparently be resisting as that's kind of how it seemed to be. There was just a total, well, fuck this, I'm done. Not listening to another non-duality speaker or speaking or meeting or whatever. And then it was just suddenly all over.
Nice story.
And the next call I had with Tony Parsons was a lot of
Was
tears and laughter.
okay, cool.
Yeah, I called him and said, I said, no one, there is just no one. No one's ever done anything. And he just said, oh, imagine that. It's like, you know,
Mm,
I don't think people kind of really realize that Tony was seemingly the only person kind of for 20 years going around and saying this on his own and turning up to all these kind of non-duality events where they were talking about, someone realizing themselves, as the true I am and all of this kind of thing, talking about non-duality as a becoming. And he was just the only one saying this for about 20 years. And it's just quite an incredible thing. But of course, that's not an intention. He's not choosing to do that. But that's quite incredible.
it is. He shared about this yesterday a tiny
Mm,
bit, and at one point it was pretty touching. A rush of tears was coming
mm,
out. Yeah, must have
mm,
been yeah, something. Yeah,
mm,
yeah.
mm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Against all odds, so to speak,
Mm,
still being forced to somehow share this message as the only one. Yeah.
mm.
Mm.
Yeah, 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 amazing. Mm. And it is just such a there can be. I mean, there's no sort of ultimate way it is or apparently happens or isn't, but it just can be such a unimaginable falling in love, but totally empty and impersonal at the same time. And really, the sharing is just this outpouring of this impersonal, emptiness, but also is just that fullness of just love. But it's not love as an emotion. Unconditional love isn't an emotion or a feeling. Of course, the mind will automatically think of unconditional love as being in a state of or a positive emotional state all of the time, or being in a happy and super happy and blissed out all of the time. No, the unconditional love appears as everything. It's sadness, it's tragedy, it's thinking fuck Tony Parsons and fuck non-duality and fuck this message. All of that are just expressions of unconditional love. Isn't that amazing? Mhm. And a question in the chat: in what way has life changed since it apparently all fell away? So life hasn't changed at all, but it's to be kind of apparently living as this sort of contracted, limited state is dramatically, profoundly different to there just being boundlessness, openness, spaciousness. It's just, there's just no comparison in that sense. But nothing's changed about life. There's still the apparent good, bad, the ugly. There's still the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows. It's just not happening for anyone or to anyone anymore. And there is just never anywhere anything as being unfulfilled or lost or missing or incomplete about whatever appears. So if it's pain, if it's sadness, if it's sorrow, if it's joy, whatever, or bliss, whatever is appearing is just absolute wholeness, completeness, and very, very natural, just very simple, ordinary, natural. There's nothing in the end exotic or kind of esoteric or trippy about the appearance. But I mean, seemingly the contrast at first from, again, sort of living as this contracted, limited state of knowing. When everything's known, it's sort of dead in a way, you know, and just as that falling away apparently happens, and it's just the aliveness that this is just quite stunning. And it is still that aliveness, but it sort of seemingly settles, and I would say apparent life goes on. There's just no one knowing or having an experience of that. It's all just wholeness appearing, empty fullness appearing, emptiness. There is just emptiness, nothing appearing as the fullness of this. And a question, does anger or sadness not last as long now? Do you know, it's really difficult to say, because there just is no longer any experience of anger or sadness as such, but apparently anger and sadness can happen. And yeah, it doesn't really stick to anything. So there's no story. There's no kind of, oh, why am I sad? What's sad? Oh, what do I need to do about this? What do I need to change about my life or myself in order to not feel so sad? Or how do I, you know, what do I do to avoid being angry, or to avoid feeling anger? I don't like how anger feels, so I want to avoid that. No, it is just completely limitless, infinite, free to be however it appears to be. And it just is just completely natural. You can sort of notice it in, you know, tiny children. They can be 1 second just sort of absolutely the world is ending, stamping their feet, rolling around on the floor, crying and yelling and screaming because they can't have an ice cream or something. And then seemingly it's all just can just suddenly change and just all be over. And yeah, mm, yeah, life is just not happening as a continuum anymore. So you know, so as not to be confusing about when saying there are apparent ups and apparent downs. You know, this includes the whole apparent humanness, but it's not being experienced as a continuum, that there is someone who is having ups and downs, who is on a journey which is full of ups and downs and twists and turns and anything like that. No, it's just very immediate, just, yeah, immediate aliveness, just appearing as whatever is, or whatever apparently is, of course. But the funny thing is, that's just how this is. That's how this naturally is. It just seems to be sort of covered over by this kind of artificial layer of knowing, of experience, of the being an individual. But that turns out to have just no reality to it. It only seems to have a reality from within the experience, or within the illusory experience, the dream. When the dream is over, it's just that it never happened, and it was never really going on. Not even as an illusion or a dream. There wasn't someone being in an illusion. There wasn't someone being in a dream or living life as a dream. The dream is that there is a dream of me. The illusion is that there is an illusory self somewhere in here or wherever. The illusion is that there is an illusion. So it isn't about trying to get rid of an illusion. It isn't about trying to get rid of something that actually isn't happening, of course. Which is why there's nothing to teach, there's nothing to offer in the way of something that can be grasped or understood or taken on board, so to speak, because it's already like that. It's already wholeness. And a question in the chat. Hi Neil, does our mind create our illusory separate reality? No. No, it's energetic. It's an energy which seems to create the impression that there is something here existing. And then what seemingly comes out of that energy is an illusory experience that there is an individual or a me or an I am an I, which is living in separation, which is living as being a separate something to everything else. So you can't think your way out of something that thought isn't actually creating in the first place. Would the character Neil get upset or frustrated if a housemate or flatmate constantly left a mess around the house? Yeah, possibly. Yeah. But fortunately, I don't have a flatmate. So yeah, but yes, yeah, maybe. Yeah. Funny thing is, though, when Neil was a person, I was very sort of obsequious, as in never really kind of would speak my mind, so to speak. When I was a person, I was always like the person doesn't like to feel uncomfortable. So this would always avoid saying confrontation if possible, to so as not to cause upset and things like that. And that's the funny thing. That doesn't happen anymore. This is much more likely to tell someone to fuck off these days than a couple of years ago, perhaps. The next question, is the Neil body no longer claimed by anyone? Well, the body is simply an empty appearance. There is just no one in it. I understand that there may be an experience happening in other bodies, so to speak, that there is something existing as the body or in the body. But that is the dream. That is the illusion. And I'm sure the individual, because I used to think it when I was a When I was a seeker, I used to imagine that if there was no one in the body controlling it, what would it do? You know, what would happen? You know, it turns out that the body kind of knows what it's doing. And there's obviously a conditioning, and there's a seeming character, which is also just part of the body. And I would say that in some ways the character is a unique expression of the body, but there is just nothing separate or incomplete about that. That's just what appears. So there's already no one claiming a body. Is the character Neil glad it discovered this message? No, it was quite possibly, this message is quite possibly the worst thing that the individual can discover. But there was gratitude, there was feelings of gratitude, yeah. Yeah. But not a gratitude for something, a gratitude for nothing ever happens. The seeking is a pain in the ass in a lot of cases. But I do remember thinking it was the most amazing thing I'd ever heard. It was awful, but I also remember thinking it was the most amazing thing I'd ever heard. But it's just not popular. It's just it will never be popular. I remember being quite surprised that when I sort of discovered this message or this communication, that I, of course, shared it with all of my friends who were also kind of spiritual seekers, and they just weren't interested at all. And they weren't even sort of upset by it or anything. They just weren't interested. But the individual isn't. It's only interested in something it can do for itself. So it just won't engage with anything that is not offering something. Although I would say the message or the communication can challenge certain belief systems for some individuals. And then it seems to be a kind of an instinctive response for some people to obviously want to protect and defend those beliefs about what they think is the answer to seeking or what they think they've discovered about themselves or spirituality or on their spiritual journey. It's threatening. It's a threatening message, threatening communication, because for the individual, it threatens the whole of its existence and therefore the whole of its reality. Do you think that the urge to know comes from the insecurity of the individual? Yes, yes, in a way. I mean, you could say so. Yeah, yeah. The individual just seems to, yeah, it feels threatened. It finds life sort of threatening, um, because I think really on some level the individual kind of knows it doesn't know anything about this or about life or about itself, and that's uncomfortable. So it's looking for something solid, it's looking for something safe, which for the individual, the currency of the seeker or the individual seems to be knowing. And if I can know more about this, myself, life, everything that apparently happens, then I'll be safe in that knowing. But knowing is just the function of the knower. It's just they are the same thing, really. The knowing, the knower, and the need to know, and the knowing, they are the same thing. In the same way, really, that energetically, the seeker and seeking are the same thing. The individual and the seeker are apparently the same thing as well. Well, they are the same. They are aspects to the same dream. Can the self grow and evolve? Thanks. Only as an illusion or as part of the dream that there is a self which could grow and evolve. I think what sort of happens is just things just seem to just kind of, if we're talking about belief systems and things like that, for the individual, I think they can just sort of naturally change and fall away. But then, of course, the individual will just claim that as happening, as a happening to itself, actually as part of itself. That I am changing with my belief systems, or I am changing um, with the new experiences that I have. That's all a part of that dream. And all the time that's going on, there's just timeless boundlessness. Is life easier now? Well, who would know is really the answer to that. There's just no one having a life anymore. So there's no one really who would be having an experience of life as seemingly being easier or not. But I would also say for the individual, life seems to be very complex and complicated. Which seems to be a side effect of that need to know what's happening, know everything about what's going on. This whole time that the individual is existing or apparently existing, then it's kind of constantly in this relationship with everything else and trying constantly get everything else worked out. And of course, it would experience itself to be having a relationship with itself also. So it's working on that as well. So it's all very complicated and complex, and there's lots of different dynamics and things happening, and that the individual has to manage. Mhm. It's hopeless because it's a dream. It's hopeless because this is all there is, regardless of it's appearing as a dream or not. It's hopeless because this is it. This is all there is, which is no thing being everything. And because there, of course, there is no individual. Do you think that this is the same message as Ramana spoke of? I don't. I'm not very familiar with everything Ramana Maharshi said, but everything I've seen, no, is all to me gives the impression that it's suggestive that there is someone who needs to realize something or do something or see themselves as being something in some way. And no, so my impression was that he was a teacher who was sort of helping people to have a realization of wholeness or oneness, or to become an awakened being of some kind. No, which is the antithesis to this, actually, because all the message is doing here is just pointing out that the I am is the dream or the illusion in the first place. So there is no I am that can ever become enlightened or awakened or liberated, or whatever word you want to call it. But then some people have come back to me and said, oh, if you read what he was saying towards the end of his life, he was talking about everything's nothingness and emptiness. And so, yeah, possibly. But certainly the quotes and things that I have seen of his talks and what he talks about create a very different impression, I think, energetically. There's something to do, there's something to get to, there's something that can be realized, there's something else. And all teachings really have to begin with the presupposition or the assumption that this is not wholeness already, and that therefore something has to happen for this to be or become or be seen as the wholeness that it is. The suggestion from here is that even the searching for wholeness is wholeness.
Hi, Neil.
Hello.
In the story, it said that Lao Tzu, has avoided to say anything, to write anything, but he wrote a book, Tao Te Ching.
Yeah.
And first he said the Tao that can be said is not the true Tao. Could you comment on that?
Yes, well, again, there's bits of the Tao Te Ching which do sort of have a flavor of what we're talking about here, certainly. But then again, there are bits that don't. I mean, don't ask me to quote or recollect anything from it. It was probably 20 years ago that I was looking at that. And there was a wonderful little book which I really enjoyed at the time, called The Tao of Pooh, about Winnie the Pooh. And it was a Taoist teacher who was kind of looked at the stories of Winnie the Pooh by A.A. Milne and drawn comparisons to the to Taoism or Wei Wu Wei or something. But yes, well, there's nothing that's not this. So on the one hand, of course, this can't be put into words or described, and the words will never describe this. The words will never describe wholeness. But equally, of course, words are wholeness just appearing as words. And there's no understanding to be reached with the words. There's nothing actually to be realized. So liberation, or so-called liberation, as we talk about it here, is simply the end of the illusion that this isn't wholeness. This never becomes wholeness. It simply is already, and that can be overlooked, apparently, in the dream.
Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Mo.
I listen to Osho. I am fans of Osho.
Okay.
And of many of his book, the Heart Sutra, the Buddha said, he mentioned that Buddha said that this me is an illusion. There is no one, and ultimately there is no one. There is no you.
Mm.
But he said also the true meditation when no one is meditating.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Well, I would agree with that. Yeah, yeah.
So, is there a meditation
I think there's aspects. I think you can find flavors of how we're talking about, or what we're talking about here in traditions, but I think that, you know, the traditions then become the traditions because they become a way, they become a something for someone to do. My friend is I've got a dear friend who is a very devout Buddhist. He lives in a Sangha, and I think he is on the way to becoming a full a kind of a full-on Buddhist monk. I don't know what to call it, sorry. And he would talk about that he has to prepare himself for enlightenment. There's a whole list of things he has to do. I have to heal my trauma. I have to stop having negative thoughts. I have to, you know, be in this sort of special place in a way, or there's something I have to do to work with this ground of being in order to invite nirvana into my life. And of course, the Buddhist tradition that he speaks of, that it may take many lifetimes to do this samsara, you know, recycling of birth and death and so on, and that's fine. that's what's happening there. But of course, there's just nothing to be realized. It's already.
So this statement, true meditation, is when there is no one meditating. How can meditation or no one is meditating? Well, meditation mean there is someone is meditating. But
I'm with you. Yeah. I mean, we could get into a whole discussion really about what meditation is, but you know, why can't meditation be a walk along the river? Why can't it be listening to music or doing something like that? But the whole time there is a sense to be a person, something like meditating or walking along the river or listening to music will quite often be with the intention to fix something or change something about this. And that all comes out of the sense for the individual, the seeming sense that there's something, that this isn't wholeness, basically, that something's missing, something's lost. Therefore, something needs to happen, something needs to be realized, something needs to be seen for this to change from not wholeness into wholeness somehow. But it is just all wholeness already. So for the individual, I think in most cases, certainly when I was a seeker, meditation was about doing that. It was about clearing the path. It was about calming the mind. It was about being in a better place, feeling better, having a better experience, having a more comfortable existence. But ultimately, the intention was always to see some kind of ultimate truth, to try and use meditation or whatever technique it may be to somehow see through the veil, to see what it really is all about, to see this ultimate truth. So there was always the effort and the intention. And the suggestion really with this communication, it is that effort and intention which seems to keep the seeker on the kind of seeking treadmill, as long as there is this kind of a belief or idea that there is something to be gained or found in meditation, i.e. a seeing an ultimate truth of some kind, or seeing through the veil of separation, then that will always in some way obscure it. Unless that just suddenly falls away while someone's in meditation. But if it does, they couldn't possibly say that it had something to do with meditating. So if my Buddhist friend is doing his morning rituals that they do in the temple where he lives, and there is a falling away, he just completely falls away, there is absolutely no way he could come back and say that that happened because he was having a particularly deep meditation. It just isn't like that, so to speak. It's the revealing of what is already as being perfectly harmonious already, wholeness. That there just is nothing missing. There is nothing lost, therefore nothing that needs to be found. And ultimately, no one who needs to see an ultimate truth or see through a veil of separation or become enlightened.
Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Mohammed. Okay, I do have to end quite punctually this morning, I'm afraid. So thank you for coming along, everyone.